Every person aboard Mir is alive because of a machine almost nobody ever thinks about.
It has no windows, no engines, no dramatic countdown. It sits quietly inside the station, replacing the oxygen disappearing with every breath. Crew members activate one canister after another as part of ordinary maintenance. Most finish their job unnoticed. They produce oxygen. They're removed. Life goes on. For years, that's exactly how it worked. Then, one routine replacement was switched on. Within seconds, it became the most dangerous object aboard the station. A brilliant white jet bursts from the side of the canister. It doesn't climb. It doesn't dance. It doesn't search for the ceiling the way fire does on Earth. Instead, it drives straight across the module, like a cutting torch locked in place. Bright fragments drift away from its tip. Behind them, black smoke begins spreading through the compartment. The fire has only just started. Mir has already become a different place. Hold the canister where it is. Just moments ago, it was life support equipment. Nothing more. One of hundreds of nearly identical oxygen generators, trusted by every crew that had ever lived aboard the station. No astronaut would have looked at it twice. No engineer expected this activation to be different from the last. The object hasn't changed. Its purpose has. The machine designed to keep 6 people alive is now feeding the thing most likely to kill them. That sounds impossible. It isn't. The chemical reaction inside the canister is still doing exactly what it was designed to do. Producing oxygen. The problem is that the oxygen is no longer entering a peaceful station. It's pouring into a fire. Look beyond the flame. The emergency isn't staying where it began. Mir isn't one open room. It's a chain of pressurized modules connected by narrow passageways. Every meal, every experiment, every hour of sleep, every trip through the station follows those same corridors. The crew know them almost without thinking. Now place the burning canister back inside that map. It stands inside Quant 1. Beyond the flames waits one of the Soyuz spacecraft. The distance between them is only a few meters. The route might as well be another world. The white jet stretches farther across the passage. Smoke begins swallowing everything behind it. The corridor hasn't moved. The station hasn't changed shape. Yet one of the most important paths aboard Mir is disappearing in front of the crew's eyes. On Earth, almost everyone knows what to do next. Move away from the fire. Find an exit. Leave the danger behind. Inside Mir, every one of those instincts is about to fail. The escape route lies beyond the flames. The station has no street outside. No parking lot. No place to stand while firefighters arrive. Everything keeping the crew alive is still inside Mir. The air. The electricity. The communications. The remaining life support systems. Walking away from the emergency isn't an option. For the first time since the fire began, the crew face a decision no fire drill on Earth ever teaches. To survive, they may have to move toward the flames. Not away from them. Hold that thought. Because it's only the first rule about fire that space is about to rewrite. Return to the flame. Notice what it refuses to do. On Earth, fire follows patterns people have trusted for thousands of years.
heat rises. Smoke rises with it. The cleanest air stays low. Inside Mir, the first of those rules quietly disappears. The flame never bends upward. Neither does the smoke. Nothing inside the station tells either one which direction is up. The fire doesn't look unfamiliar because it's larger. It looks unfamiliar because gravity has stopped shaping it. Now stop watching the flame. Watch the air. At first, the smoke seems harmless. A thin gray ribbon drifting away from the burning canister. Then another appears. Then another. Within seconds, the separate ribbons begin merging into one expanding cloud. It doesn't climb toward a ceiling. It doesn't gather above the crew. It spreads everywhere at once. Across the walls, across the floor, across the ceiling. Those directions no longer matter. There is only the station, and the atmosphere slowly changing inside it. Look down the corridor again. The opposite hatch is still visible. Barely. The edges soften. A handrail begins fading into the haze. Labels beside a control panel become difficult to read. Nothing has moved. The air between those objects has... Every second, the crew lose another piece of the station they know so well. The fire is no longer transforming metal. It's transforming space itself. The familiar layout of Mir begins dissolving inside its own atmosphere. That creates a second problem. One far more dangerous than poor visibility. Smoke on Earth eventually escapes. Through windows. Doors. Broken roofs. Even a room filled with smoke usually belongs to a much larger world outside. Mir has no outside. Every breath the crew will take for the rest of this emergency must come from the same sealed atmosphere now filling with smoke. Nothing leaves. Everything stays. The station keeps vacuum outside. It also keeps every poisonous gas inside. For years, that sealed atmosphere had quietly protected everyone aboard. Now it begins protecting the emergency instead. The station hasn't stopped doing its job. The meaning of its job has changed. The atmosphere no longer belongs only to the crew. The fire is using it too. Return to the burning canister. The white jet still cuts across the module. The smoke continues spreading. Neither one has reached the entire station. The consequences already have. Every module connected to Gavant 1 shares the same air. That means everyone aboard now shares the same emergency. Not because they can see the flames, because they're breathing the same atmosphere. The crew reach for emergency breathing masks. At first, they seem like the obvious answer. They aren't. They're the first sign that another invisible resource is running out. Time. Each mask carries only a limited supply of breathable air. The moment someone seals it over their face, a countdown begins. Not on a clock. Inside the mask itself. Use it too early, well, and there may not be enough left later. Wait too long, all the thing. And the atmosphere may decide for you. The masks aren't replacing oxygen. They're buying decisions. Every minute they provide must be spent carefully. Every unnecessary second is gone forever. Without realizing it, the crew have begun fighting something much larger than a fire. They're fighting the station as it slowly changes around them. And Mir isn't finished changing yet. Watch what happens next. The fire
is still burning. The smoke is still spreading.
But neither of them is driving the emergency anymore.
The station is... Look across Mir, not at the flames, at everything connected to them. Every module shares the same atmosphere. Every person depends on the same life support system. Every decision made in one compartment changes the conditions somewhere else. The crew aren't trapped inside several rooms. They're trapped inside one living machine. And that machine is beginning to work against them. That changes the problem again. At first, the fire looked like something happening in Cavant 1. Now, the boundaries disappear. The smoke belongs to every connected module. The contaminated air belongs to every crew member. The emergency no longer has a location. It has become an environment. That realization changes the crew's priorities. The burning canister is no longer the first thing they must defeat. First, simply stop. They have to keep the station livable long enough to reach it. Look at the breathing masks again. One crew member moves toward the fire. Another waits. When the first mask begins running low, it's handed to someone else. Then another exchange. Then another. The masks become part of a rotation. Not because anyone planned it that way. Because the station has quietly forced them into a new way of surviving, something unexpected has happened. Oxygen is no longer simply keeping the crew alive. It has become a currency. Every mask contains only so much of it. Every decision spends some. Every mistake spends more. Inside Mir, survival is no longer measured by distance from the fire. It's measured by how wisely the crew spend the atmosphere they still have. The station keeps changing. The corridor is no longer just a passage. It's a barrier. The atmosphere is no longer just air. It's a battlefield. Time is no longer measured in minutes. It's measured in breaths. One by one, familiar objects stop meaning what they meant only minutes earlier. The transformation is happening everywhere at once. Not because the station is breaking apart, because every system aboard Mir depends on every other one. That's the hidden weakness of a spacecraft. On Earth, you can often isolate an emergency. Close a door. Leave a room. Call for help. Inside Mir, nothing is truly separate. The atmosphere connects everything. The crew connect everything. Life support connects everything. The station behaves as one system, which means one failure can quietly become everyone's problem. Return to the burning canister. It hasn't grown larger. It hasn't moved. Yet somehow, it now controls almost every decision being made aboard the station. Not because it's the biggest object, because it has changed the meaning of every other object around it. The fire is no longer consuming Mir. It's rewriting it. And before the crew can reclaim the station, they first have to understand what the station has become. The crew don't realize it yet. But the emergency has reached a turning point. Up to now, they've been reacting. Trying to stay ahead of the fire. Trying to stay ahead of the smoke. Trying to stay ahead of the poisoned air. Soon, all of it, that won't be enough. Because none of those things are actually driving the disaster anymore. The canister is... Return to the oxygen generator. It hasn't become larger. It hasn't become hotter. It hasn't become louder.
Yet every second it continues burning, the station moves farther away from the place it was only minutes earlier. The corridor grows less usable. The atmosphere grows less breathable. The masks become more valuable. Time becomes more expensive. Nothing aboard Mir escapes the consequences of that single reaction. This is no longer a fire spreading through a spacecraft. It's one machine slowly rewriting the rules of an entire world. Look at the canister again. Forget the flames. Forget the smoke. Look only at the object. It isn't part of Mir's engines. It doesn't steer the station. It doesn't generate electricity. Its only purpose is to replace the oxygen disappearing with every human breath. For years, that purpose never changed. Crew members installed the canister, activated it, removed it when it finished, repeated the process hundreds of times. Routine became trust. Trust became habit. Nobody expected life support to become the first thing they would fear. Return to the flame. The crew attack it with a fire extinguisher. White suppressant strikes the glowing metal. The jet barely changes. Another burst. Still burning. That isn't bad luck. It's physics. The canister isn't relying on the station's atmosphere to keep burning. The chemical reaction inside it is supplying much of the oxygen itself. The fire isn't surviving because Mir is feeding it. The fire is surviving because the machine is feeding itself. Another rule from Earth quietly disappears. Starve the fire of oxygen. Here, I'm available. That no longer works. The crew aren't extinguishing an ordinary fire. They're trying to interrupt a chemical reaction already taking place inside a sealed metal cylinder. Place an unused oxygen generator beside the burning one. They look almost identical. The same housing, the same fittings, the same mounting points, the same labels. One would quietly disappear into the history of another routine maintenance day. The other has already changed the future of everyone aboard the station. Nothing on the outside explains why. The difference has always been hidden inside. Invisible. Waiting for the moment the casing failed. Now look at the damaged cylinder. The metal has split open. Instead of releasing oxygen through a controlled outlet, the rupture has become the mouth of a torch reaching across the module. Temperatures climb beyond 900 degrees Celsius. The glowing jet continues cutting through the air. Years later, investigators would recover the damaged housing. They would study the fractured metal, the scorch patterns, the damaged equipment surrounding it. They reconstructed how the torch formed. What they never reconstructed with complete certainty, was the single event that started it. A contaminant, a manufacturing defect, a hidden flaw. Several possibilities survived. One definitive answer never did. But by then, another realization had become impossible to ignore. The crew weren't fighting a machine that had stopped working. They were fighting one that continued working after it had already failed. That distinction changed how engineers would think about life support systems for years to come. For the crew aboard Mir, it changed something even more immediate. They finally understood what they were really trying to save. It wasn't the canister. It wasn't even the corridor. It was the station itself. The realization has changed. The crew are no longer asking,
How do we escape the fire? They're asking something much harder. How do we make Mir a place where people can live again? That sounds like the same question. It isn't. A fire can be extinguished in seconds. A spacecraft cannot be made safe that quickly. Return to the burning canister. The white jet still cuts across the module. Not as fiercely as before, but it refuses to disappear. Another extinguisher strikes the glowing metal. The flame shortens. Only slightly. The crew move closer. Not because the fire has suddenly become weak. Because, for the first time, it has become predictable. They aren't defeating it in one dramatic moment. They're taking away its advantages. One decision at a time. One burst at a time. 1 meter at a time. Watch what happens around the fire. The smoke is still there, but it no longer spreads as quickly. The darkness hanging inside the module begins slowing. That change is almost impossible to notice, until familiar shapes begin returning. A handrail, then a hatch, then the edge of a control panel. The station isn't repairing itself. The crew are slowly earning it back. That may be the strangest part of surviving aboard a spacecraft. Victory doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives one recovered object at a time. First, the corridor. Then, visibility. Then movement. Then, communication. Only after that does survival begin to feel possible again. Look down the passage. Only minutes earlier, it separated the crew from safety. Now, people are moving through it again. Not confidently, carefully. Every step tests whether the station can still be trusted. Every breath asks the same question. Is Mir becoming home again? The answer isn't immediate. The air is still contaminated. The smoke still hangs inside the modules. The emergency breathing masks are still needed. The fire may be gone. The station is still wounded. That distinction matters. On Earth, people often think a fire ends when the flames disappear. Inside a spacecraft, that's only the beginning of recovery. The atmosphere still has to support life. The station still has to function as one connected system. The crew still have to prove they can remain inside it. Only then is the emergency truly over. Return to the damaged canister. The flame is gone. The metal cylinder remains fixed exactly where it always was. Blackened. Split open. Silent. Nothing about it still looks dangerous. Yet almost everything that changed aboard Mir began here. At first, it looked like a machine. Then it became a torch. Then it became the center of the emergency. Now it becomes evidence. Not evidence of a fire. Evidence of something much larger. That a spacecraft isn't a collection of independent machines. It's one living system. When one part changes, everything connected to it changes too. Space never changed. Mir did. The crew changed it back.